Hello everyone, I am Eric Alden. Welcome to our Dark History, where we discuss the darkest people, places, and events in human history. Today we're going to be talking about the one and only Jefferson Davis, the President of the Confederate States of America. Now, I had recently done a BIOCAST episode on him and covered his life in extreme detail. So you can listen to that in the description down below. You can download the audio, or you can listen on YouTube if that's what you prefer. But today we're actually just going to be talking about some of the big lessons from his life, because I think it's very easy to fall into this standard narrative that is taught by the public school system. And that's just kind of that all of the Southerners were bad people. Anyone that was involved with the Confederacy in any way is just kind of an evil person, and they don't have any redemption. They have no redeeming qualities. They're just bad people, and we beat them, so, to heck with them. I actually think there's a lot more nuance to the situation, especially after having done the research on Jefferson Davis. And the cool thing about it is that there's actually a lot to it that really makes you think, wow, especially him. I found that he was a lot more of a decent human being than I had previously thought. Because especially, right, it's just like you go along with the narrative that we're all taught as kids. And you just kind of think he was helping those slave owners. He was a slave owner. It's very easy to be like, oh, well, he was a bad person. Well, you look at his life and some of the things he did and the respect that he earned from so many people. He was very similar, politically speaking, to Abraham Lincoln in a lot of ways. And it just kind of goes to show that it's like, there's a lot of nuance to these situations. And I think, especially if you're an American, you just have to understand the Civil War better. Because the way we think about it right now is just not enough. A comic book narrative that's oversimplified and doesn't touch on any of the serious facts and the events that went on, it just doesn't suffice. This was probably one of the most important events in American history. Maybe the most. I think it's up there with the Revolutionary War. It's up there with World War II. It was the turning point. It was where American became a sense of identity for the first time. It wasn't like that before. Because before, each of the individual states were, they kind of functioned as their own country. And after the Civil War, it wasn't like that anymore. So, yeah, it's very fascinating, but let's get right on into some of the lessons that come directly from the life of Jefferson Davis. Now, one of these is actually that the slavery supporters were not the radicals during the Civil War and the lead up to the Civil War. And this is something that you probably know, but you just don't realize that you know. It's not until you really look at this topic in depth that you can really sit down and be like, oh, wow, the slavery supporters were actually the norm, right? The people that were holding up the institution, this is something that has been around since the beginning of time. There were slaves in ancient Rome, ancient Greece. This is just one of those things that's been part of the human experience for as long as anyone can even know. So the fact that there were people that were trying to outlaw it, it's kind of radical. There were some people that were like, you can't outlaw slavery. That's like outlawing sexual relations. Right? Those are both things that have just been around forever. And a lot of people, especially in the South where they relied upon slavery a lot more, it was just very much part of the times. And here's something that I don't think a lot of people really understand about the South, because I think it's really easy to get wrapped up into, well, the South was bad and that's that, and it doesn't matter any of their arguments or their reasoning. I actually don't think that's the route you should take. You should really try to understand even your enemies, because when you understand your enemies, it just makes you a smarter person, and it's just better off overall for society, because when you understand some of the problems, like going forward now, like there are certain situations now we can probably avoid because of the knowledge and practical wisdom that comes from the Civil War. The big thing for the South was that their economy depended so much on slavery that they just couldn't get rid of it. If you were an aristocrat or even like a medium, middle class, okay-ish kind of guy, you had slaves. That was a good chunk of your entire net worth. Maybe not every single one, I'm sure there's going to be some exception, but just about all of the Southern politicians had slaves. All of the big business owners had slaves. This was an integral part to their economy. It played a big role. And Jefferson Davis talks about this extensively in the books he wrote after the war. He talked about how the North was able to act like the moral superiors. They were able to, take on the radical abolitionist stance because they weren't going to be hurt by abolishing slaves. If you don't own any slaves, no one that you know owns any slaves, it's very easy to be like, well, we can just get rid of slavery. But if it's your family that is going to be completely ruined by abolishing slavery, well, you take a little bit of a different stance now, don't you? It's a lot easier to part with slavery when it doesn't impact, in a state where it's already legal, you can be like, oh, whatever. Like, it's not going to change your economy. And it gives you this opportunity to kind of act as the moral superior. Because in the South, they developed their economy around agriculture, farming, planting. It's hard even today with modern technology to run a farm. It's difficult. There's a lot of labor, a lot of work that goes into it. And sometimes, there's bad luck. There are bad yields sometimes. Sometimes an animal gets into your stuff. There's a lot of risk that goes on with agriculture. And, you get one bad season, sometimes your entire, there goes all of your wealth. Because you might not be able to pay for your land, to pay your taxes, to pay for your house, to pay for the next the next round of seeds for next season. Like, it just goes away. So it's very easy to really get wrapped up in the moral side of things and to remember that the abolitionists, they were the radicals. These were the people that wanted to abolish something that has been part of the human experience for thousands of years. And that's not like a knock on them. Like, I actually like the abolitionists because I think without them, slavery probably doesn't go away for a long time. It's probably another couple of decades that you still have slavery, that you still have this evil institution. And, even you take the morals out of it. When you get rid of slavery, all of a sudden you have an economic boom because guess what? People invest in labor-saving technology and devices. And that is what created the Industrial Revolution. That's why the Industrial Revolution happened in the North a lot sooner than it did in the South. Because when you can have all this free labor to get this stuff done, why do you care about saving, labor-saving technology? It doesn't save you any labor because guess what? You already got it for free. Or, close to free. You own someone in their entire life. You paid for that slave, but you get a lot of labor out of them. So it's one of these situations that it's like, you can kind of see. Really, people try to make it out like it was a moral thing. And I think for the abolitionists, it was. And again, props to them. But again, they didn't have any stake in the game. Because for the South, it was just about this is basically all of our economy. This was basically how a lot of people were making their entire living. So I think that's something that's really important to think about. Because, there are a lot of things going on today that you can draw a parallel to. Let's look at colleges, for example, and how they have football. Now, what many of you may not know is that football players are extremely likely to develop certain neurological disorders. They're likely to have certain problems, concussions, all kinds of health problems And sometimes it's just not reported on enough. Because guess what? It's profitable for the college to just kind of say, whatever. And when you have some of these people, sometimes there are a bunch of football players that are, committing suicide, that they are depressed, that they engage in impulsive behavior as a result of, you take enough hits to the head, that messes you up, man. The human body was not made to be hit and hit and hit, and it takes a toll on you physically and neurologically. But guess what? There's a lot of money in it, so the colleges, they're not in a big rush to say, to get rid of this college football. Because guess what? That's where they make a lot of their money. You can see the parallel, can't you? It doesn't matter if someone is going, if a couple dozen football players are going to commit suicide or be worse off or have poor health or any of that other stuff. Well, you know what? We're making money. You know what? It's okay. So, and, I'm sure this applies to a lot of other things as well, which, you can think about that on your own. But that brings me into the next practical lesson from his life. Being a product of the time doesn't make you a bad person. It really doesn't. And this goes back to this idea, slavery has been around since the dawn of civilization, and probably even before then. Because you think about it in evolutionary terms, if your small tribe can overpower someone else's tribe, well, guess what? What are you going to do with them? Are you really going to kill them all? Or, maybe you enslave them, right? This is just something, it's like, why wouldn't you do it, right? And especially for Jefferson Davis, he was less so a product of his time than most people even believe. So he may have been the president of the Confederate States. The literal president of the Confederacy. You get past that, and then you realize he was actually very progressive with his treatment of slaves. He didn't believe in beating them. He didn't believe in hurting them. He actually gave them very good lives. He paid them certain wages. He gave them a lot of free stuff. Now, granted, these people were still human property. I can't imagine anyone really wants to be in that position, but when you have a master that really makes an effort to form a relationship with you and to really be a decent person to you and provide a good life for you, that's a lot better than, some of the ways people had been doing slavery before. Because, you think about the kind of cruelty that comes out when someone owns you. No, they don't really care if they beat you or, do other unspeakable things to you that I'm not going to discuss here, but I'm sure you could imagine the kind of things that happen to slaves. Some terrible stuff. Some absolutely terrible stuff. And the fact that Jefferson Davis went out of his way to kind of be a proponent of this progressive, fair, equal, decent treatment of slaves, honestly, props to him. Because in a lot of ways, that was a progressive stance. That was the step that I think society in America was a lot more ready for. Because you have slavery as it is as an institution. It was still kind of abusive and sadistic in a lot of ways. The next logical step was this more progressive form, right? It would have been a much easier and smoother transition to that as opposed to just abolishing it outright, the way the abolitionists wanted to. Because they just wanted to get rid of all of it right that moment, right here and now. It's gone forever. And, that's maybe 2 or even 3 steps away. It's a lot harder to get from where you are in civilization and in your society to that. It's a big step. And, a lot of people, people were literally willing to fight and die to protect this institution. That should really give you an insight to how radical the abolitionists were. Because it's not like they wanted to change, one small aspect of political or social life. This was a big thing. A very big thing. Now, Another important thing to get into with this is that Jefferson Davis was actually a very respectable person. Now, you can definitely have your criticisms of him. A lot of people do. But he actually doesn't have too many enemies. When he was in the military, he fought mostly against Native Americans because that's just kind of what you did at the time. There wasn't really like anyone else to fight, so you were kind of keeping the peace between the Native Americans and the American settlers, just really trying to keep the peace. And one of the wars that broke out was very, actually big. There was a lot of bloodshed, very brutal war. And one of the leaders of the Native American tribes was a man named Black Hawk. Now, when Black Hawk was captured, Davis was in charge of transporting him across the country. And when he did that, he treated him with respect. He didn't humiliate him or beat him or anything. I mean, Black Hawk actually wrote about it in his autobiography and said, yeah, you know what, this Jefferson Davis guy, he was like a pretty respectable dude. He treated me nice. There was actually one occasion where Black Hawk was being transported in a boat, and there were a bunch of people that kind of had interest because, Black Hawk was kind of famous or infamous in the American colony or the American country. And there were a lot of people that just kind of wanted to come on board the boat, and kind of like heckle him, right? I mean, this is like a big leader of an enemy group of people that you just defeated, right? You got him captive on a boat, It's kind of almost natural instinct to want to go on that boat and make fun of him, right? I mean, you got to imagine, during World War II, you capture, Hitler. He's on a boat in the United States. I'm sure if you're nearby, you kind of want to go on that boat and make fun of him. It's just kind of human instinct to want to do something like that. But what's cool about Jefferson Davis is that he didn't let any of these people mess with Black Hawk. He was very respectful. He was very respectful of his space and, how he wanted to be treated. And, it's just like, honestly, props to him. Because it's like that's a very gentlemanly way of doing warfare, of treating your opponents. Because it's very easy to, you get a hold of your enemies, let's abuse them. A lot of people have fallen victim to that in history. And the fact that Davis was able to rise above that, I think it really shows that his character, he wasn't all that bad. That's all I'm trying to say. He wasn't all that bad. And actually, he was a very brave and courageous person on the battlefield. Now, he actually fought in the Mexican-American War. And, you can talk about the morality of that war, whatever it is. But Davis, really, he was fighting to advance his political career. Let's just be cynically honest about it. That's what most people fought wars to do. Like, historically, if you fought in a war, I mean, you go places in Washington. I mean, how many presidents have we had that were soldiers of World War II? Right? Quite a few. I think it's every president from Eisenhower to George H.W. Bush Sr. Quite a few guys. I mean, that's like a long line of presidents. Almost all of them fought in World War II. And that's because fighting in war advances your political career. Anyway, Davis was very courageous when he fought in the Mexican-American War. So much so that he actually won over the respect of his former wife's father, right? His former father-in-law, Zachary Taylor. Taylor actually went on to become the president of the United States later in life, but you got to think about it like realistically. Imagine being able to, marry someone that, and unfortunately for Davis, his wife had died. So this was the father of the wife of his that died, and win over the respect of that man later in life. I mean, honestly, props to him. Not an easy thing to do. If you can win over a former father-in-law, someone that probably, Taylor didn't really like Davis. Didn't really like him. Even rejected his proposal to marry his daughter in the first place. So, the fact that he was able to win over his respect, kind of how it, honestly, he couldn't have been that bad a guy. And like I've kind of been going on here about, I don't think Jefferson Davis was too horrible of a person. And on top of all this, though, he suffered horribly for most of his life. He was very sick. He had neurological disorders. He had this terrible pain in his face that it's called neuralgia, I think. And it was, just horribly painful. He got wounds in the Mexican-American War. It was probably a very rough time. Very rough time for him. And, the fact that he was able to, have a fairly productive life. Again. And it just kind of goes to show not all the Confederates were bad guys. Not all the Confederates were bad guys. And this kind of brings me to the third big lesson here. Circumstances can put you in a bad place. They really can. Because Jefferson Davis wanted the United States to succeed. I mean, this guy was literally named after Thomas Jefferson. This guy loved America. He considered himself a son of the Revolution. But when the South started seceding, he was a Southerner and a slave owner. There was no way he was going to fight for the Union or go to the North, or, that just wasn't going to happen. Politically, he wanted the same thing as Abraham Lincoln. He, it's like, maybe we can get a little bit more progressive on the slave thing. I mean, Lincoln, he was very honest about it. Like, he didn't really, if he could keep the Union together, that was the only important thing for him. The only important thing. I mean, I had the exact quote in the BIOCAST episode, but he said, he wrote actually, that if he could keep the Union together without freeing any slaves, he would do it. And I very much believe him, because the slavery issue, very hot button issue at the time, and it almost destroyed the country. It almost destroyed the country. And, Jefferson Davis saw it just as well. When he had to go home, because he was a politician when the South started to secede, when he had to go home, he called it the saddest day of his life. Because he knew that there was going to be a great suffering upon this newly born nation. I mean, it wasn't very old. It was like not even 100 years old that the United States was now literally killing itself. So it's actually really sad when you think about it. All the lives that were lost. I mean, hundreds of thousands of Americans. It's really tragic in a lot of ways. And, it's just too bad that, there couldn't have been a more peaceful road to really go through with slavery. Because the country was definitely better off and is better off without it. But, getting from there to here was a very difficult political process, winning people over. I mean, you got to gradually go your way. And when you allow these hot button issues to divide your country, I mean, this is what you get. Crazy suffering. Crazy, crazy suffering. So, so those are the big lessons from Jefferson Davis. Slavery supporters were not the radicals. It doesn't make you a bad guy to be a product of the time. Especially because, there's going to be some future point in history when we're probably viewed as, crazy bad guys too. So it's like judging people from the past doesn't make a lot of sense. And then lastly, the circumstances that you are put in, sometimes they're, it's just how it is. You got to play the deck that you were given. Sometimes you were given a really bad hand in life, and you just you got to make the best of it. That's all you can really do. I really hope you guys enjoyed this. I really thought this was an interesting topic. Jefferson Davis, Crazy guy. The Civil War, really fascinating topic, and I probably will be talking about this more in the future. So be sure to download the BIOCAST episode on Jefferson Davis, his life. There's a lot of really good information in there. Spent a lot of time researching that. So I really hope you enjoy that. I really hope you enjoy this. Be sure to follow the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.